I guess you don't need me to tell you that pessimism gets a bad rap. In a world that is kind of insanely addicted to optimism, the pessimist stands out as someone who's kind of a bit weird. The reality is that pessimism is a route to greater happiness. There is an image of pessimists as being kind of down in the mouth, doom mongers. It's not so. Pessimism is, in a way, a kind of scientific approach to life. It's based on reality rather than on inflated expectations, and the word expectations is fairly important there because it's the center around which all of this revolves. So, the title is The Pleasures of Pessimism, and the pleasures are numerous. And if you're going to take pessimism seriously, then you need to work at it. Because there's dynamics in life that you need to understand. Like, one of the dynamics is that for every pleasure, there will be an equal or greater pain. It's just the way it works. You can't have an up without a down. So if you're a pessimist, then you can kind of take the downs up front. And what you're left with afterwards is pleasure. But I'll get onto that later. So if you take life in its raw essence, it's pleasures and pains followed by death. The pleasures tend to be kind of fairly superficial compared with the pains. So what are the pleasures? Well, sex, food. They're the big ones because we're driven by the survival drive. But those are the big pleasures, and we have others that are connected with survival. So getting a promotion at work, getting a nice new car, going on a dream vacation, all that kind of shit, The stuff that people make themselves very unhappy chasing after. Because they always have expectations that are way beyond what these relatively trivial, pathetic things can deliver. So those are the pleasures, but the pains, can be very, very large. Bone cancer. Losing someone that you love, that you're very close to. And of course, the whole fact that you will die. Pleasures are simply satisfactions of a desire, and all desires come from this will to life. So we're like dogs chasing after a bone all the time, trying to satisfy these desires, which always come from a state of want. This is Schopenhauer. If you want to read about this, read Schopenhauer. I shall have more to say about that later too. This could be quite a long podcast, actually. So, the pleasures are relatively small, and they consist of trying to assuage, to satisfy desires. And the desires are pretty much always related to trying to establish oneself in life in a more impressive and certain manner. The pains, on the other hand, are pretty big, and can be pretty big. In fact, they can be horrendous. Stuff that nobody wants to contemplate or talk about. So, life being that way, then we could easily accuse the optimist, who is a person that believes that everything is going to be good. So when they start a business, they believe that their business is going to work. When they get into a relationship, they believe the relationship is going to work. Whatever it is. If they get a job, they're going to get a promotion and so on. You can see the optimist really as someone who's in deep denial, where their expectations do not match reality. As I've just said, the reality is that your pleasures will be, they can be modest or quite small, but the pains will be very large. So that's not a pretty thing to contemplate. So there's a certain amount of what you might call lack of courage, really, and the ability to see life as it is. And even if you are an optimist whose life unfolds in exactly the way you want, you'll still be unhappy. Because happiness consists of increases in power. And nobody experiences just a continual increase in power. What power? The power to exist. So this optimism is kind of a lack of courage. Pessimists, on the other hand, pessimists tend to be a little bit more courageous in that respect. They're happy to contemplate the unpleasant side of life. And by contemplating it, it's sort of almost like a vaccine. It sort of gives them a certain amount of resilience, because they don't expect things to go well. So you can see pessimists as people who take the pain up front. But as I mentioned earlier, the key in all of this is expectations. So the pessimist will say, when things are going well, I know, as sure as whatever's sure, that there'll be a downside. And in fact, pessimists are not particularly impressed by things when they're going well, because they know it's sort of like a bit of a trick, really, to lull them into a sense of security so that life can then stab them in the eye with a big knife when they least expect it. Of course, I'm anthropomorphizing it. Somebody criticized me on a previous podcast of anthropomorphizing. Well, grow up. Just understand what's being said. Life doesn't plan to stick you in the eye with a big knife. Life doesn't plan anything. Life doesn't give a shit about you. But the way things turn out, once you've had a nice big rise in positive outcomes, increased power that you might feel, there's only one way one thing that's going to happen after that. You must know that. There's going to be a downside. And so pessimists are not conned by good fortune. That's really important, because most people are. And even well-practiced pessimists, like me, can be taken in by a bit of good fortune. Although, as you progress in this, as you get your black belt in pessimism, you'll be less and less taken in by the favourable things that happen in your life. So when things are going well, you should expect that they will start to go badly. Equally, when things are going badly, you should expect them to get worse. We're not talking here about when things are going badly, it's only this bad that things must get better. No, they'll probably get worse. And then you won't be disappointed. And if they do get better, well, that's a pleasant surprise, isn't it? but no point expecting them to get better. And of course we all go through something at some point at the end of our life where things go badly, and then they go as badly as they possibly can do, namely we die. So, here are some benefits of being a pessimist. There's less disappointment because you're not setting yourself up all the time. There are a number of books out now about pessimism. It's starting to become a little bit fashionable, which is unfortunate, because it'll get corrupted in some sense. In fact, the books will almost certainly say you can be a pessimist, but actually, by being a pessimist, you can achieve everything you want. Well, that's not what pessimism is. Pessimism is expecting things to go down the toilet and maintaining that attitude. So, less disappointment because you're not setting yourself up for failure. And some of the books that are out talk about the fact that pessimists tend to make much better business people. Why? Because they plan for fucking failure. I think it's something like 9 out of 10 business startups have failed within a year, and within 10 years 99 of them or something are barely, they've either failed or the owner is barely making a living from them. With those realistic statistics, what are you going to do when you build a business? Are you going to bet the farm on it? No, of course you're not. So there's less disappointment if you are expecting things to go badly. Now, the big enemy in all of this, and the thing that distinguishes a pessimist from an optimist almost entirely, is hope. Pessimists do not indulge in hope. Why not? Because hope is the opposite of fear. You only hope for something if you're fearing that something else might happen. Pessimists do not indulge in hope because they know at any moment things can always get a lot worse. Whereas the optimist, their life is built on hope. It's a very sad state of affairs because life has no consideration of their desires and dreams and all the rest of it whatsoever. It can squish them like a net any time it wants. So hope is the enemy of pessimism and the crutch of optimism. Pessimists tend to be less neurotic. There's no denial going on. The optimist has to be in denial. Just giving you an example of business startups. They have to be in denial about that to bet the farm or to be unrealistically or to have unrealistic expectations of what their business is going to do. They have to be in denial to do that. And don't tell me that denial means that, well, they'll achieve something that somebody couldn't achieve otherwise. It's bullshit. The people who are successful in business tend to be pessimists, people who prepare for failure. So less neurosis, no denial, and the inner conflict that comes from it, because something within you knows that you're bullshitting yourself. It's like the ultimate neurosis is a neurosis about death. Something within you knows you're going to fucking die. But you are treating life in yourself as though you're going to live forever. It sets up a neurosis. And neuroses are painful because you're having to maintain a lie all the time. Pessimists tend to be more emotionally stable. They're not on this massive roller coaster of hopes and disappointment. They know it's all going to turn to shit at some point. So they're not riding this massive roller coaster all the time. And as a side effect from all of that, pessimists tend to be happier. They have fewer expectations and a lower pleasure threshold. So, if you expect that, as I did actually recently, I sold a motor car, and I expected to get absolutely fuck all for it, and actually got a reasonable amount of money for it. If my expectations had been, well, this is a great motor car, it's worth at least, whatever, I don't know, 20 grand or something. And then I get 5, I'm going to be disappointed. I thought it was worth fuck all, and so the 5 grand was a nice surprise. So I was happy with that. Here are a few pessimist mantras that you might want to take on board. Expect nothing from life, because as far as life is concerned, you are nothing. That's a hard one to accept, isn't it? Because we get lost in all our dreams and expectations, and somehow we think that life owes us the fulfillment of those dreams and expectations, and it doesn't. It doesn't give a toss about what happens to you. As Lao Tzu says, we are straw dogs. I know I'm always quoting this, but I'll quote it again. Heaven is heartless, treating all things as straw dogs. Straw dogs, temporary things that are used for a purpose and then disposed of. And that is what you are to life. Read any of the greats, Plato, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, whoever you want. In fact, I'm going to get onto that in a minute. So expect nothing from life, because as far as life is concerned, you are nothing. This is a great blessing. The burden of being important is something you've been spared. Just imagine if you were important to life. Let's say God appeared to you and said, you have got to, you have got to tell people that I don't give a fuck. And that's what you've got to do. And that's what your life has got to be dedicated to. And you are important, and you've got to do that. Well, fuck, who wants that kind of burden on their shoulders? So, not being important is a huge blessing. It's a tremendous freedom. Doesn't matter what you do, because none of it's important. Right, so I'll just read that out again. Expect nothing from life, because as far as life is concerned, you are nothing. And another mantra. For every pleasure, there will be an equal or greater pain. The pain side of the equation is bigger than the pleasure side. In fact, all pleasures are, in many respects, are relief from pain and desires. So, if you're hungry, you eat because it's not pleasant being hungry. And you get the pleasure from the food, and that pleasure lasts for a while, until you're hungry again. So you're just on this treadmill of constantly relieving desires that are, in their own right, painful. So Schopenhauer would say, pain is real. Pleasure is kind of ephemeral, really. It doesn't really exist. We experience it for a bit when we satisfy pleasure, but that's about it. Sorry, satisfy desire. So for every pleasure, there will be an equal and greater pain. So another little mantra. Life has its own momentum and is just a machine doing its thing. Relax and float downstream, because you do not control anything. And as I've mentioned in podcasts before, you don't control what you'll be thinking in 5 minutes from now. You don't control what your emotional state will be in 5 minutes from now. You don't control what your body will be doing in 5 minutes from now. You could have a fucking coronary or something and be dead in 5 minutes. So just relax and float downstream, as it says in the Beatles song. Plato summarized the whole thing very nicely. He said, what is born and dies never really exists. I've done a podcast on being nothing or being zero in, I don't know, previous podcast was it, or 2 podcasts ago. But Plato summarizes the whole thing very nicely. What is born and dies never really exists. Has no being, as some people say. So, if you are determined to become a hardened pessimist, then you need to read the Pessimists. And in fact, most philosophers, in some shape or other, are pessimists. And Socrates summarized the whole thing by saying that the aim of philosophy is simply to prepare for death. There you go, there's a nice pessimistic statement. Of course, you can't say that in the company of most people, because most people are optimistic in some way or other. They have to be, because they've told themselves a whole pack of lies. And they have to keep that going. And to bring that whole house of cards down would be extremely painful for them. So yeah, if you're serious, then people like Schopenhauer, Cioran, Cioran, if you're interested in Cioran, Nietzsche to some extent, Gurdjieff to some extent, Spinoza to some extent. Spinoza started his first work by saying that what he saw in life was vain and futile. Doesn't get any more pessimistic than that, does it? Seneca. In fact, most philosophers, apart from a few, are pessimistic in nature. And the postmodern philosophers, postmodern being those who came after people like Spinoza and Kant and Hegel and all those people. In fact, Nietzsche is seen as the first postmodern philosopher. Read The Wall by Jean-Paul Sartre. Extremely moving account of 3 men who are about to be executed. This is familiarizing yourself with reality. And what you'll find is that you become happier. Of course, the worst thing you can do to become happy is to chase happiness. It'll make you miserable. And as part of this topsy-turvy world, as Gurdjieff called it, if you try to understand your real situation and to cultivate pessimism, you'll find that you become happy. If you try and chase happiness, you'll find nothing but misery, which is exactly what the optimists find. So the choice is yours.